Hi folks, sorry for the slight delay here. We had a little bit of technical problems, but good evening. And thanks for showing up tonight. I'm glad to be able to report to you for the first time in the new year. I haven't seen, or I don't actually see you, but we haven't spoken really since the middle of December. A lot's happened, even though we've been on a Christmas break since that point in time. There's still been a lot going on, especially in the last couple of weeks. I'm going to deal with the elephant in the room first of all, and that was a vote that we had in our caucus today where our Conservative caucus in Ottawa made the decision to expel one of our members of Parliament from the caucus. And that was a difficult decision. And I'm certain you realize if you've ever been in business with a business partner and you decide to go separate ways, that's never an easy decision. But in the end, you hope you're making the right decision for your futures in separate ways. And that is the tough decision we had to come to today as a caucus regarding one of our members. And it didn't have anything to do with any type of standard that we wouldn't apply to ourselves. I know the initial narrative on this was that it had to do with a contribution that was received by my colleague Derek Sloan for a donation that he had nothing to do with, of course. If that standard was applied to all of us, we'd all be looking through our donors to see who gave me which amount of money. That is not the reason for the decision that we had to take as a caucus today, but a decision we made, a decision about a team moving forward together, and that's where we need to take this. We need to replace this government in Ottawa. Anything that distracts us from that, any obstacle, needs to be overcome very quickly. Today we've moved past that. Thank you. A lot's happened as well. Just last week I was at the Calgary Chinese Community Services Association, which has renamed itself to Diverse Cities, which is fantastic because they serve so many people in our community. And it's a difficult time right now in COVID, but I won't be able to celebrate Chinese New Year's with so many of the associations that I often get to celebrate that. So let me say right now, Shenyang Kuai Lu to all of you out there. Happy Chinese New Year coming forward here. But the programs I know you've all been affected with, CERB, or the CRB as it's called now, the program where we replace income where people can no longer work as a result of being locked down. We've had many adjustments with that again. Artists, I had to step forward a couple weeks ago about artists that had been given grants. Grants, they were taxed on when they received them, and employment insurance also applied, and somehow that wasn't applied as income, and they wanted to retroactively take those funds back where they'd actually applied for CERB in the initial period. So that's a big one where you actually another gap where the CRA is coming up and saying, well, we're not sure how this applies one way or another. We need certainty around these programs. For people that are cut off from making a living, we need to make sure that we're providing them easily and efficiently with the means to sustain themselves while they're not able to work during the pandemic. And I'm happy to carry that bat for everybody that needs it going forward here. We also saw the retraction on how we were dealing with travel here, particularly in Calgary, but across the country. But in Calgary, we had the test program going on where you had to be tested for COVID when you returned. It's a very effective program. You tested once at the airport, had to confine yourself at home for 2 days, and have another test within 7 days. And it worked very effectively in maintaining there was no spread across Calgary. It was something that we were looking at rolling out across the country. Edmonton now is following suit with the test program that happened in Calgary far in advance of the 26-week test period. So we're doing well with this program. For the government to come in with a new program, often when people were overseas and having to arrange tests, expensive tests in many jurisdictions, and 96-hour tests when you only had 72 hours in the span to have the test, was a bit of a rushed response to people that had already made plans, and I know it contributed to a lot of uncertainty for people that had already made travel plans and were already overseas. So filling those gaps, making sure we get more certainty as far as how we deal with the pandemic, I think is the government's responsibility. We will hold their feet to the fire about decisions that are made in haste or without proper backing about how this should be done scientifically and properly. A few things around the tour I was on with my leader last week. Aaron O'Toole and I were at a bunch of meetings in Alberta, in Northwest Territories, British Columbia, the Yukon, and Nunavut, where we got to participate virtually with so many associations that we depend on, of course, to make sure that we're building this country going forward and that we represent the vast number of Canadians and their concerns in actually replacing this government and moving forward with a better government. The best one for my input was, of course, here at home, the Canadian Association of Oil Well Drilling Contractors, and we had a good back and forth, Aaron and I did, on many of the effects that are happening, what's happening with the industry right now, and what we need to do to come out of it. The other issues that you look at that I have to deal with on a regular basis, my bill on carbon capture, utilization, and storage has had a lot of uptake, and we've had a lot of meetings with environmental organizations about how solid this bill is in solving our carbon problem going forward here. It is a major step forward on how to deal with excess carbon and decarbonize our economy, continue to produce the energy we need to build this economy going forward. This is a great way to deal with it. It's cost effective, and we're looking forward to rolling it out and being competitive with the United States in that respect. Of course, pipelines this week. Keystone looks like it's going to be canceled forthwith by the president. We're doing everything we can to pressure this government, to put all the pressure they can on the U.S. government about the sense this makes and how actually canceling this pipeline will move North America backwards from an environmental perspective. And that's not what we're after here. We want to make sure that the solutions that are coming forward here are better for the environment, better for our economy, better for our integrated trade relationship with the United States. That is our focus. To make sure that narrative continues to build forward about how important this is in decarbonizing and our role in that and how we help with the North American economy. Line 5 is also going to be an issue because the governor of Michigan has said she wants to decommission the line where it crosses the Straits of Mackinac in the Great Lakes. That's a problem. That's been up there for 57 years. It's never had a spill. Enbridge is in the process of designing a tunnel to actually make it even safer than it is now and ensure we have energy transit across this country to serve Eastern Canada and even some states very well as far as their energy input. Ontario, over half of their oil comes from this pipeline, and almost half of Quebec's oil also comes from this pipeline. So it is a very important one for the entire country and how we serve ourselves from an energy perspective. I've spent a lot of time on the Liberals' new bill on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. That is going to be something you will see in the next legislature, where we actually are going to be debating that and the effects it's going to have, both positive and negative. This is a great aspirational document. It's going to have significant legal effects on how we govern ourselves in Canada. We need to make sure that's well understood, and we need to make sure that society continues to work well with our Indigenous organizations going forward. And I've met with Indigenous organizations about how they see this will hold them back as far as their economic development, as far as the progress they've made on Section 35 rights over the last several years. We want to make sure that that progress continues to happen. And lastly, I'll talk about a nice presentation we had last week where I got to participate with the University of Calgary Students' Union Leaders Dialogue. I was on a forum with Whitney Isaac, who's the MLA in Calgary Glenmore, along with Councillor Farkas, and we had a great dialogue with a lot of students. That those are the types of events that make my job fun at the end of the day, because we get to actually impart some of our experience we've had in the past. And I was a student political leader way back when, and sharing those stories. Whitney was there with me at the same time, and we actually shared some excellent stories back and forth. So that's a pleasure, those types of events, and happy to do those more and more. I know I've got a lot of questions from a lot of you here tonight, so I want to get right to those. Thanks for entertaining my opening comments. I think it's going to continue to be busy going forward here, and I want everybody to know that it looks like the government, the Liberal government, wants to push for an election as quickly as possible during COVID. So we need to be prepared for that. We need to be able to show Canadians what a better government looks like to govern this country from coast to coast to coast. And Aaron O'Toole, myself, and my colleagues are hoping to make sure we get that policy input and that clarity about how we govern this country better going forward, fully in front of Canadians. That's our role over the next little while. Thank you. Now moving to questions. One moment. Dustin Cassabaum had a leftover question from the last time we met. I hope you're on again, Dustin. Dustin said, in 2020, police reform has been a huge issue. With the potential of the Police Act being opened in the new year, how are you planning to contribute to changes for police accountability? And Dustin, thanks for the question. I know that the Police Act is a provincial jurisdiction, and I don't mean to pass the buck on this, but the police's role in society is very important. I think that maintaining the trust of the public is something the police have to continue to do going forward. That Police Act, I think, has to make sure that the accountability of those police to an independent body is very clear, and that independent body has oversight mechanisms that is directly reportable. That would be my main recommendation, is that that independent body, that continued independence of overseeing the police is maintained, and that our tax dollars are being spent wisely by our protective services. Thank you for the question. Now, Chris Isherwood asked me, why are Chinese pilots being trained at Penhold, Alberta? And I'm glad I had this question ahead of time, because I actually didn't know that. So we looked it up, and there does seem to be some activity happening at Penhold, Alberta, and it does seem to be a private enterprise. And so it has nothing to do with the military, which was the initial concept that we were thinking about, our Chinese Army pilots or Air Force pilots being trained in Canada. The answer to that is no. But there are many private education facilities in Canada where we train people from overseas. Obviously, capacity, we've got some ability here to train civilian pilots from around the world, and I'm anticipating that that's what's the people that are operating Penhold are actually doing. Thank you, Chris. I should say in follow-on, it was one of the questions we raised in the House of Commons in December and November, was the link between the training that the Chinese, the People's Liberation Army was participating in and winter training in Canada. And there seemed to be a disconnect between the military, which was speaking against it, and the Prime Minister's office, which was trying to push forward at the time. But these discussions went back 2 years. From all we can tell, it didn't seem to happen, but we are continuing to push to make sure that those links, are very well understood, and hopefully we're not training other people's armies on Canadian soil. Sanjay Sahu says, how are we going to audit federal government COVID-19 spending and track every dollar spent? Well, big job, Sanjay, and appreciate the question. And I think we have to be accountable for Canadians' money that is being pushed out the door very quickly here in many respects. We pushed for more oversight from the Auditor General to make sure we could get to these programs and see where that money had been spent, particularly to see if they were being spent effectively or if there was just money that was going out too quickly without accountability. We're going to continue to push to have the Auditor General more and more involved in these programs, because many of them were rushed out the door, and it took the government a long time to adjust to the changes that were required in those programs. For instance, in the rent assistance program, which was one that I was personally involved with, the initial parameters around that was you needed a mortgage, and the landlord had to apply, not the tenant. And we moved that towards now where it actually is the tenant applying for that rent assistance, including on the other fixed costs such as utilities and municipal taxes that are still required even though you're in lockdown. So these changes came along, but they came along very slowly. When I hear the government talk about Team Canada, we had to push pretty hard to get our productive suggestions brought into that equation. I'm happy some of those got brought in. There's others that I think had to be brought in as well. But thank you for the question. Vaughn Lacharit asked me, you do a great job. Thank you, Vaughn. I'd really like to know more about what free vote means. Actually searched it up and got it. There's party discipline vote and free vote. What do you think about having a constituent vote? We have the technology. Good question, Vaughn. And one of the things that COVID has shown is that we can start having more digital government. The question is, what do you involve all of society in as far as these decisions? Because a lot of it takes a lot of time to actually go through the committees, go through the legislation, find out where the legislation can be moved so you've got some consensus across the country to make it best for the country. I'm not sure everybody in society is going to be able to participate in that process on a full-time basis, but it's an interesting concept if you think about certain referenda type questions that we can put to the people in that respect. Let's see how that moves going forward, but thank you. Eddie Ho asks, please push to challenge the Liberal government's unreasonable quarantine policies, especially now that COVID tests exist. Agreed, Eddie. For the traveling public in particular, and I know many constituents in Calgary Centre have to travel for a living, getting that extra test now has been punitive. It's extra time in many of these places. You can't get it done in 72 hours. There's 96 hours or sometimes up to 5 days required, even in the United States. So these are advanced economies and they're expensive to get through as well. This is the push we have to have. And again, I'll say that the Calgary program was working really well as far as limiting spread from travelers. Traveling turned out to be safe. Many businesses were coming around from around the world, but bringing us back ideas as well. Some of the business people I used to work with before I became involved in this job went to Jakarta, and they told me that before meeting with the Ministry of Energy in Jakarta, they actually had to take the test and wait 15 minutes for that rapid test result to come back. We don't have that in Canada, and I think those rapid tests, as we push the government time and time again on this, would open up our society significantly from what we've been experiencing to this point in time. Thanks, Eddie, for the question. Now I've got a question from Pamela Walker. She says, thank you. As an independent travel advisor in your riding, I have seen my income drop to zero in March and remain there since with no end in sight. Uniting mid-2022. Living on CRB, is not enough, seeing how it ends in just weeks. Do you see the CRB being extended for those in need? And secondly, is the federal government even considering rapid testing at major airports across Canada, or the entire travel industry is in a colossal downward spiral and we need help while also helping keep Canadians safe? Thank you for your time and service. Pamela, you're right. As I've said time and again, the Calgary protocol was working very well. To actually set the industry back the way we have, not just from a travel advisor's perspective, but from a traveler's perspective and the airline's perspective as far as how they emerge from this without more and more financial damage. This was something that we need to continue to have. Other countries that we compete with on the airline basis for business travel, for leisure travel, etc., but there's not that much of that going on, are now moving in and capturing the space where our Canadian Airlines used to have. So we've got to make sure that we continue to have. This is going to end one day, and we have to make sure that we come out of this as healthy as possible. That competition needs to continue to happen. Rapid tests and the Calgary Protocol are two of the available solutions that we need to make sure move very quickly into the process. The CRB, I think, is going to continue to be available for people that haven't been able to make a living during COVID until we actually come through the other end of this. And at this point in time, I think it's week by week, month by month, but it does seem to be repeating itself as far as its availability going forward. Thanks for the question, Pamela. Alden asks, in 1 second, although the future of oil and gas looks bleak, we do appreciate your efforts. However, the number one priority is getting the vaccine. What can you do to help get the vaccine out faster and equitably? Alden, we put forward all kinds of protocols that we think should be part of the rollout, first people that receive this vaccine, etc. That's about as much input as we can give at this point in time. We're pushing the government again on the availability of vaccine, the availability of rapid tests. One of the things that's become evident over the last couple weeks is the unavailability of vaccine facilities in Canada that used to be able to produce vaccines. Now there's still a small capacity, but nothing's being done there at this point in time, and they're constructing a new site in Quebec City. That is part and parcel of two different schools of thought on drug development in Canada. Now, the Conservative Party in the past has legislated for more patent protection for drug developers in Canada. And that the trade-off you have there, of course, is more patent protection means the drugs that are developed actually cost more for the consumer, but you actually get more jobs, you get better drugs, you get more testing done in Canada. Now we have a generic drug industry in Canada with no research capabilities because they just copy off patent drugs, and as a result that means less expensive drugs for Canadians, but no capacity. So none of these things are free at the end of the day. Now we're at that situation where we understand what the cost of not having capacity is in our drug development network in Canada. I'd like to see us get back to the point where we're recognized as a country that actually has drug development capabilities and the ability to produce vaccines at a time like this for our population. Thanks for the question. David Polson asks me, as Natural Resource Shadow Minister, what are you going to do about the Keystone XL pipeline? David, everything I can. And I hope you've seen me speak about this in the last few days. I've been on a number of media shows across Canada. We had very clear indication when President Biden today was running for president that he would cancel Keystone XL. He labeled that very clearly. Now we're trying to make sense of the decision that he's already put on the table, that this is a poor environmental decision for North America. It means jobs, of course, for both the US and Canada. It means infrastructure that connects our resource to its markets, so we will suffer less of a discount to our oil. But it also means a lower carbon footprint where it gets processed on the US Gulf Coast, because now that will be replaced by heavy oil that comes from offshore jurisdictions that don't have the same environmental record that our companies have. The oil sands have reduced their carbon footprint by 20% over the past 10 years. There's no energy source in the world with as strong a carbon reduction profile as Canada's oil sands. So we've pushed this point. We've tried to make the Prime Minister push this point with the President-elect, now the President. This is all the strategy we have at this point in time. Make sure they understand the consequences of this decision from a partnership perspective with the US, Canada-US trade agreement, but also with respect to what it means negatively for the environment as a result of this decision. I can hope at this point in time, but we know we are running up against a decision that a president seems like he's already made. I wish that the government had pushed harder on this post-election and reaching into all their contacts, and the Prime Minister had actually made several calls to the President-elect about how we actually move this forward and do better for the environment across North America. Thanks, so. Von La Charite again asked me a question. The 2015 legalization of cannabis promise, I believe, was responsible for a lot of Liberal seats being won. And interestingly, many of those seats were lost by the Liberals shortly after. What do you think they will try this time? I'm sorry, Vaughn, I didn't see that analysis that's why they won those seats and that's why they lost those seats. I think that decriminalization of marijuana was a long time coming. And you look at the way we were enforcing that law, frankly, we were almost decriminalized long before it was decriminalized. If there was a whole body of voters out there that said, it's about time you moved on this issue alone, then government should have had that poll in front of them long before they did. I think it's a great move forward, but I'm not drawing the direct link between the loss of the seats the Liberals had in the last election as a result of that already being legalized. I think it's proven to be something we're adjusting to very well, and we want to make sure that we don't criminalize too many Canadians for what is a practice that it has not been criminal for quite some time in reality. Thank you. John Smiley asks, while the worst of the pandemic may well be over by the end of 2021, I suspect Canada and the world will have a long road back to stability, given the tremendous economic damage that this unusual event has precipitated. How would a Conservative government steward national recovery? Well, we've shown that, John. I think one of the things that we have to make sure we understand in this is that in a pandemic like we've had here, you look at the industries that have sustained us, and they have been the tangible goods industry. The industries that have really been hurt badly, of course, are the service industries. And that has opened up many weaknesses in our society about who are the people working in service industries in Canada, and making sure we're taking care of those people as we go forward. But Canada, as a trading nation, has a lot of tangible resources that the world needs. So we continue to produce those tangible resources. You think about agriculture, think about forestry and lumber, think about oil and gas and mining resources. Think about the things we produce in this country, including foodstuffs, including manufactured goods, automobiles. These are things that are going to continue to do well coming out of the pandemic. Focusing on these and making sure that the future is something where we're not falling apart before that future comes to pass, I think is one of the most important things. I know early in the pandemic I was dealing with the tourism industry, and the premise we had was make sure you don't have to break something before you rebuild it, because that just takes time and money at the end of the day. So how do you put something on sustainable support so it's there, it's available, and it's infrastructure that's readily usable the minute this is over, so we can resume the type of society we had before. So that's what I think we bring to the equation. I hope that's a good answer. Let me know if there's something I missed in there. Thank you, John. Alden Hertig has asked me a question, supplemental question, he says, from one I've heard before. Do you think Alberta can be involved in the pharmaceutical industry? Diversification of our economy is important, and we have a lot of medical research here already. Alden, you're exactly right. You look at the biotech that's actually developed in Alberta, moving that forward to the next step of actually producing vaccines and other drugs, medical drugs in Alberta, is I think a great diversification step, and something that our post-secondary institutions and the research institutes that are allied with them would embrace wholeheartedly. So thank you for the question. Brian sends in a question. He asks, foreign airlines have taken the Canadian wage subsidy on top of bailouts from their governments. Why is the government giving money to foreign corporations? Brian, it's a question we've asked. There's no parameters around the operating companies in Canada, where some of them had let their people go before accepting the money from the wage subsidy. So there's a lot of auditing here that has to be undertaken and make sure that people that weren't eligible for this, i.e. offshore without employees at that point in time in Canada, return that money. And that builds on the question that was asked earlier about how we audit all this spending in the future. Thanks, Brian. Kaylee asks, I'm really worried about Enbridge's Line 5 cancellation. We already don't get Alberta oil through to the coast, and now we might not be able to get it exported to our own country. What can you do to make sure this pipeline doesn't get canceled when so many pipelines are under fire? Katie, that's a great question. I am dismayed that the international relationship between Canada and the U.S. has been strained on pipelines to the level it has, given the fact that the importance of a free trade between our two countries was premised upon free trade in energy first and foremost. And it's what led to decades of prosperity since 1988. That's something that most Canadians don't understand. Is part of the first free trade agreement was free trade and sharing energy. And any reduction in energy provided by one country to the other had to be met as a similar reduction on a proportionate basis in the home country. That's something we signed on to, And that provided security as far as energy trade and energy supply between the two countries. And you think about how much we've prospered in our energy industry since 1988, you can see how much it's built the whole country, not just Alberta. And I know towns out east that are entirely dependent on free trade as a result of what we look at as free trade and energy. Now that seems to be crumbling. And this is a pipeline that's been there for over 50 years. And suddenly, not even a national actor, but a state actor, the governor of a state, is coming in and saying, we want to stop this pipeline because we think it's dangerous for the lakes. It violates the oil transit treaty that's been around since long before this Prime Minister Trudeau. The previous Prime Minister Trudeau signed this and was supported by Joe Biden, who's now the President of the United States, when he was a senator in the Senate in the United States. So there's a bunch of legislative parts at play on this that we need to look at very carefully. The U.S. is a big trading entity. They are our most important trading partner. Energy is our most important trade with them. We need to make sure that doesn't fall apart and that we continue to have free trade across that Line 5 pipeline. Interestingly, Line 5 supplies both Ontario and connects to Line 9, which supplies Quebec, but also supplies Ohio, Michigan itself with some propane liquids, and other states in the Midwest. So this is something that is going to have to get resolved fairly quickly. We know it's got a deadline, according to the governor in Michigan, in May, because she's allowed to give 180 days notice that she wants to shut that pipeline down. We expect the federal governments to get involved in this. It is a very important file. Recognize that our oil will still get to market. It will just be more expensive, less environmentally friendly as it goes by barge and by train and by truck from where we can't ship it through an underwater pipeline. Thank you. David asks, our Canadian energy is extremely plentiful, enough to supply all of Canada and several other countries. We must stop importing energy from the Saudis and other Middle East countries and any South American countries. Could Energy East be a solution? Yes, David, Energy East was a solution before this government came in. And recognize the proponent of Energy East, which is TC Energy now, actually walked away when more environmental standards, downstream standards, emission standards got placed on them, which more or less made it incongruent, incomprehensible to get through that actual environmental assessment process. So it was an engineered process to make them back away, and back away they did. After spending close to $1 billion in getting the design up, going through the public hearings, a new government changed that narrative very quickly. I think consuming Canadian energy is very important in Canada. We are an energy importer as far as oil and gas goes on the East Coast. So you think about the big refinery in St. John, New Brunswick. You think about the refineries in Quebec. Those get a lot of oil from offshore, but also from the United States of America. So providing for our own, making sure that we're not taking a discount on the oil we produce in this country and actually supplying our own people is a pretty good idea, despite the fact that the transportation costs all the way across the continent will probably be north of $5 per barrel. It's still a good idea. Thank you, David. Vaughn Lacharit comes back and asks me, I noticed the government's plan is to bring in 400,000 immigrants per year. I think we need this, but how can we justify that when so many people are out of work now? Thanks, Greg. You are one of a kind. Well, thank you, Vaughn. 400,000 immigrants this year was the number that was put on the table by the immigration minister. We missed that number significantly last year. I recognize that Canada is a country people want to come to Canada based on our system of laws, based on the fact that you can build a family here, based on the fact that it is an open economy for everybody. You move to Canada, the world's your oyster here, and it's such an attractive place to come if you come from other jurisdictions around the world. We're lucky to have this country. We need to make sure it continues to be a wonderful country that attracts people from around the world and is the beacon of opportunity for so many immigrants. 400,000 is a big number during COVID. I don't think they're going to hit it. I think they missed last year by a significant margin. And I think until the borders actually open up and we actually get people moving back and forth, that number will probably be down by about half again this year. That's what I see as reality. There still are refugees around the world that we'd love to have settle here. But you're right, we've got to make sure we get this economy back on track and make sure all people, Canadians and the people that are desiring to be here, get the opportunity to build a life going forward here. It's a big ask. I recognize that we're looking at a goal here, but I think until we come out of this pandemic, I think that goal is going to be watered down until we can actually start building jobs here in Canada again. Thank you. John Smiley asked me a question out of curiosity. What is an issue or issues that you think is important to the future of Canada that doesn't get enough attention from the current government, the media, and or populace? John, great question. I'll go right to my strength. And one of the reasons I ran was looking at the finances of this country prior to COVID and how one government was spending so much money in one period of time. That money has to be paid back. When prior to this pandemic, we had a very prosperous economy. So to be running a deficit when you're prospering means that you're going to have to run a bigger deficit when you're not prospering. You've got to make sure you've got the ability to finance people that aren't able to work at that point in time. Traditional Keynesian economics, if you will, and many of us are neo-Keynesians. You spend money when you need to spend money, but it requires you pull that money back and pay that money back when you no longer need to spend that money. So any money you insert into the economy, you have to think about it when it has to be retracted from the economy. This whole notion of constant deficits and burgeoning government debt across all levels of government, federal, provincial, municipal, is just adding burden to our kids, to our grandkids, to the interest payments they're going to have to pay. And they're all going to have problems of their own to deal with going forward. They're all going to have pandemics potentially that come across their the problems they have to solve. They're going to have potentially conflicts, disasters that might happen. These are all things that will cost money that have to be paid for in real dollars at the point in time they happen. The more we impoverish ourselves going forward, the less likelihood we're going to have to be able to deal with those problems when they arise in the future. So I think we've got to start accepting that this is money we have to start paying back once we come out of COVID. Get out of the whole constant deficit mentality, get out of the quantitative easing mentality, which is leading us nowhere, and get back to the fact that what we actually pay for in society, we pay for now. We don't push onto the bills of future generations. Thanks for the opportunity to say that, John. I got a question here from an old friend and colleague, Ken Trainer. Hello, Ken. What impact will the change to Biden's administration affect the U.S., Mexico, Canada agreement that Trump negotiated? Ken, I don't know. You look at that whole U.S.-Canada relationship that began with Mulroney and Reagan, and there was a partnership there. And I've watched subsequently, while that partnership has been whittled down with subsequent prime ministers, with subsequent U.S. administrations, I think as a country we recognize how important it is to have a strong trading relationship with our North American partners. It's also important to have a strong environmental relationship, because if you think about Canada right now has such a huge carbon tax, an incoming clean fuel standard that I'm combing through with all the details in it, and how it hurts our country. When it hurts our country, it means jobs move out of our country. We call it carbon leakage. We're still going to buy the same things. We're just going to buy them when they're produced somewhere else. So we've got to face this going forward. How do we decarbonize with a trade partner like the United States, where we're both working in sync? And that's what we talk about again, the Keystone XL issue is that this is a pipeline that actually facilitated actual environmental progress. And now it looks as if it's going to be stopped. That's where the two countries together aren't making good decisions. We need to make sure those better decisions are made. Thanks for the question, Ken. Alden Hertig has another question. Alden says, I know this is radical, but could Alberta hold back oil and gas royalties? And what could be the repercussions? So I'm trying to understand that question, Alden, because the oil and gas royalties are received by the province from the producers when it's produced. And of course, you probably know it's a matrix formula based on volume and price of oil and gas at that point in time. But that goes directly to the province. So I don't know who they'd be holding that back from because it is provincial revenue at this point in time. So Alden, if I've missed something there, please email back in and I'll try and respond more completely. Glenn asks a question. I think some forms of conversion therapy should definitely be banned, such as those that employ methods where the client is forced into something against their will to undergo the therapy. However, if they are seeking this treatment to deal with unwanted sexual desires, how can this be wrong? There are many people, some of them I am personally acquainted with, who testify that they have been helped by this kind of therapy. Are we going to deny their experiences because they don't line up with our own? That's a difficult question for me to answer, Glenn, because I don't agree that with your premise. I don't agree that there's treatment to deal with people's sexual desires. I believe you're attracted to whom you're attracted to based on nature. And I think that your ability to express love with somebody shouldn't be dictated by any kind of treatment. I think we've got norms in society about the age limits and those sorts of things. Those are going to continue, but the partner you choose, the sexuality you choose is your own expression, and I don't think a treatment should be even thought about at that point in time. If somebody's thinking about getting treatment because they don't like who they're attracted to, I think that might be something more due to pressure than it is due to something they want to repress. Maybe I'm wrong, but that would be my first response to you. If you need more clarity on that and you need me to actually have a dialogue with somebody in that respect, I'm happy to do so. Bridget asks, I am concerned that my job is at stake. I work for a tourism business that has been extremely hard hit by the pandemic and will not be recovering anytime soon. I understand that restrictions on mass gatherings, border closures, and capacity reductions are necessary to protect public health. But these restrictions have left me with no long-term job predictability. We need the recently announced Highly Affected Sectors Credit Availability Program, known as HASCAP, to be rolled out immediately and ready to receive applications in early January. Otherwise, this business is unlikely to survive, and I will need to build a new career. I agree. My colleague, Tony Baldinelli, held a seminar on this and issued a press release earlier this week, or I'm sorry, it was actually last week, calling on the government to actually get this program delivered. They've announced this program for industries just like tourism, saying this is being affected extremely badly by COVID, so the government's saying we're coming to your assistance. Well, it announces that in early December, and here we are. It's not early January, it's past the middle of January. So if you're going to announce something, get the details put together quickly and get it actually delivering. You can make adjustments as you go forward here. I appreciate how you don't get everything right all the time. Nevertheless, deliver this, get people working and making sure that our critical industries, our critical service industries like yours have the opportunity to weather the storm here. Thank you. Alden comes back about the oil and gas revenues and says, I mean, not allow Ottawa to receive the funds. As you said previously, many communities have benefited from revenue from Alberta resources. Correct, Alden. So royalties are received by the province. The government collects corporate taxes, and the biggest source of government revenue is actually individual taxes. So when people are working, they're contributing to taxes in Canada that pay for most of our programs. Believe it or not, that is the number one line item about how the government collects about $300 billion a year from Canadians. That includes all kinds of excise taxes, but the largest line item there, of course, is personal taxes. So more Albertans are participating in the economy. As a result, we pay a lot of taxes. Part of what's happening here is the industry not working as well. The taxes aren't obviously lining up quite as well, and those dollars aren't being distributed down the line. When we were prospering in Alberta, all that money was collected by the federal government, and about $16 billion a year was redistributed to other parts of Canada. Now, unfortunately, Alberta can't hold that back at this point in time because it's collected by the federal government. And when you actually fill out your federal taxes and deliver them a check, and actually for employees, it's subtracted from every paycheck, I'm sure you realize. So the ability to withhold something at this point in time, you're withholding something that's already in the federal government's pockets that they're already redistributing to other communities across Canada. So that's the mechanics about how that happens. I've got a question from Natasha. Natasha asks, with Biden canceling Keystone today and TC Energy stopping all work on the pipeline, I know a lot of people who are out of a job. What's Trudeau's plan to help us in the West get jobs? We keep hearing of green jobs that are supposed to replace canceled pipeline projects, but they're not there. You're right, Natasha. This whole thing, you look at how the experience Ontario went through as far as these new green jobs when the Liberal provincial government was in power there. These new green jobs were installation jobs and not long-term jobs. They're low-wage jobs, and they displaced a significant part of the economy. We need to understand that we're actually talking about, again, we talked earlier about tangible industries. Tangible industries are the ones where we're actually adding value and exporting consumables to people that actually buy those things. Green jobs are going to be maintenance kind of jobs going forward here. We also have a provincial government that's moving in this direction. And what I like to think of as the green jobs being produced in Alberta are the carbon capture and storage technologies, the hydrogen development technologies, which is going to help decarbonize part of our supply chains for energy. All of these things are where we're going to build a future going forward on tangible assets that continue to get built here. Likewise with agriculture, the more the science we look at how we actually reduce the carbon when we produce food, the better we're going to be as far as decarbonizing that part of our economy. And those are jobs. Our agriculture sector has been prospering here, as has our forestry sector, and I think that's something we need to continue to advance on. Thanks for the question. Kevin asks, I was traveling for work when the federally mandated COVID testing came into force. 3 different COVID tests, 2 rescheduled flights, and over $600 later, I was finally able to board a plane home. Why hasn't the government fixed this debacle? I have to travel regularly for my job, and paying $300 for a private COVID test every time is going to put serious financial strain on me and my family. Kevin, exactly right. We had a protocol that was working well here. The airlines were working well with it. Very few people were contracting COVID in their travels. The test program was picking them up in the 7-day test pattern, 2 days and 7 that were actually coming through. And it was just over 1% of the testees were actually saying you have to quarantine for longer. That's a good identification program. And I think we need to move back in that direction and make sure that that's a standard we apply. It'll get a lot of jobs moving. Yours facilitating international business for our province, but also our, as I said, our airlines and the rest of our service economy that needs to continue to prosper here and survive this process. So surviving is the main thing here without having to be bailed out by government all the time. If we can have a program that works, that ensures that you're able to continue to do your international business, let's facilitate it. And I'm disappointed that we didn't move with that as a standard for the travel mechanisms the government put in place to deal with COVID. Got a question from John Smiley. John says, pardon me, it's a long question. Geopolitics consultant and author Peter Zahane posits that the world is heading into a period of significant global instability due largely to the USA's return to inward focus in place of global power projection. Has the Conservative caucus put any time and research into understanding how the USA's increasing departure from international security will impact Canada? Now, yes, this is one of the things we've been looking at, particularly with the last president we had here. We're still waiting to see where the new president, President Biden, aligns on the international stage with the partnerships he's going to move forward and the partnerships he's going to push hard against. Now, you know that the last president pushed hard against a couple of countries around the world, a couple of trading relationships, and he actually damaged some of the trading relationships that the United States had with countries around the world. I know that the new president, from what he says, he wants to re-engage with the European countries where the previous president had actually turned against those relationships. We'll see where that leads. In the end, we've got a North American bubble here, if you will, where we actually trade. We've got a US, Canada, Mexico agreement, free trade between these countries. I'd like to see us work as well as possible with that administration in getting to a common environmental policy. Because as long as we're trading back and forth, we don't want to be losing jobs back and forth because of different environmental policies. And at this point in time, Canada's environmental policies are far more stringent than the US. Let's get the two on par and let's move together to decarbonizing what we need to decarbonize in the world's environment. That's the plan going forward. I think we need to partner with our closest allies, make sure we've got the other people that we're partnering with, the CAN-ZUC relationships. I know that that's a big focus for my leader, Aaron O'Toole, because of our common method of governance between Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom, and New Zealand as well, and making sure that we have those relationships and we're moving in lockstep with them from both a national security perspective, but an environmental perspective and an economic perspective as well. I hope that answers some of your question. I know it's a pretty deep question, but thank you for asking. And that looks to be all of the questions. A long one tonight, a lot of questions. Thank you for joining me. And please have a healthy and prosperous month. Join me for my next Facebook Live, Wednesday, February 24th at 6 p.m. I look forward to seeing your questions at that point in time, and we'll see what's changed in the meantime. Thanks for joining me tonight. Good night.